An ordinary grocery trip turns into an unforgettable showdown when an elderly man confronts rapper Snoop Dogg with a shocking comment. But what Snoop says next isn't just a mic drop, it's a cultural earthquake. Don't miss this story. Like, subscribe, and comment for more narratives that shake the world. The grocery store buzzed with the hum of daily life. Shoppers pushed carts down the aisles, lost in thought or exchanging casual chatter. It was a sunny afternoon in Compton, California, a neighborhood close to Snoop Dogg's heart. But today, the familiar rhythm of routine would shatter in a way no one could have predicted. Near the produce section, an elderly man named Mr. Thompson, likely in his late 70s, adjusted his glasses with an impatient sigh. His worn cardigan and neatly combed silver hair gave him a gentle, unassuming appearance. But his next actions would be anything but. Snoop Dogg, dressed in his signature laid-back style, a blue Compton hoodie and jeans, approached a nearby stand to grab a bag of oranges. He blended effortlessly into the store's flow, texting on his phone while balancing a basket of groceries. It seemed like just another ordinary day, until it wasn't. Mr. Thompson turned sharply, his eyes narrowing as they landed on Snoop. His lips pursed tightly before he spoke, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You people don't belong here," he said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. Snoop froze. His fingers hovered over his phone as he processed the words. Mr. Thompson didn't stop. His tone grew sharper. "Why don't you go back to Africa where you came from?" The store fell silent. Shoppers paused, some exchanging uncomfortable glances while others pretended not to hear. The hum of activity ceased, replaced by an air so heavy it felt like the store itself was holding its breath. For a moment, Snoop was motionless, his brow furrowed, and he seemed ready to respond immediately, but then he paused. He took a slow, deliberate breath, his expression unreadable as though he was weighing every possible reaction. Mr. Thompson, still clutching his apples, stood firm, unapologetic, and defiant. The tension was palpable. A young mother hurriedly guided her child away while an older man near the potatoes glanced nervously at Snoop, unsure of what would happen next. The silence stretched. It was heavier than any words. Snoop finally shifted his basket to his other hand and straightened his posture. His calmness was disarming, even unsettling. When he spoke, his voice was steady, deliberate, and cut through the awkward tension like a knife. "Sir," he began, his tone controlled but firm, "do you even realize what you just said?" The question wasn't angry or accusatory. It was reflective, almost like he was giving Mr. Thompson a chance to reconsider. But the man wasn't interested in reflection. "I said what I said," he snapped, his voice rising. "This is my country. People like you don't belong here." Gasps rippled through the small crowd gathering nearby. Some whispered to each other, others simply stood frozen, their eyes darting between Snoop and the elderly man. Snoop remained steady, his calm presence contrasting with the weight of the moment. He set his basket down carefully on the floor and looked directly at Mr. Thompson. "All right," he said, nodding slowly. "Let's talk about that, since you brought it up." The room seemed to hold its breath again. The crowd grew larger, but no one moved closer. They were witnesses now, like it or not. "You said I don't belong here," Snoop began, his voice carrying the weight of generations. "But let me tell you something about where I come from." His words were deliberate, each one chosen with care. "My great-great-grandfather was born right here in California. Before that, my family was brought here against their will. They worked, bled, and suffered to build this very state, this very country you're standing in. Mr. Thompson's expression tightened, but he said nothing. The crowd, however, was captivated. My grandfather, Snoop continued, his voice gaining strength, fought in Korea. He fought for a country that sent him to war but wouldn't let him sit at the same counters or drink from the same fountains when he came back. But he stayed. You know why? Because he believed in this country's promise, even when it didn't believe in him. A hush fell over the room. Even the hum of the refrigerators seemed quieter now. And my parents, Snoop went on, his tone softening but losing none of its intensity. They fought too, not with guns or fists, but by being who they are. My mother spent her life teaching kids about love and equality. My father, a community leader, would stop on the side of the road to help someone like you if your car broke down. He paused, letting the words settle. So you're telling me I don't belong here? That I should go back to Africa? He shook his head, his voice tinged with sadness. Sir, I am as much a part of this country as you are, maybe even more. My family paid the price for it in blood, sweat, and tears. Mr. Thompson's face flushed. His hands trembled slightly as he clutched his apples. He opened his mouth to respond but stopped, his words catching in his throat. Snoop stepped back, his composure unshaken. I could have walked away, he said, addressing the entire crowd now. But what good would that do? Ignorance doesn't get better in silence. It's up to all of us to be better than this, to be better than words like those. The silence that followed was almost deafening. Slowly, the crowd began to murmur, and one by one, people spoke up. He's right, a middle-aged man said. We've got to be better than this. My dad always said. The only color that mattered was the red on the flag, another woman added. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, voices breaking through the tension. Mr. Thompson glanced around, looking for support, but none came. His defiance had melted into embarrassment, perhaps even regret. Without another word, he turned and wheeled his cart toward the exit. As he left, a young cashier said softly to Snoop, "Thank you. What you said, it meant a lot." Snoop smiled faintly. Sometimes, the truth is the only way to break through. Outside, as the sun began to set, Snoop walked to his car. He noticed Mr. Thompson sitting in his own vehicle, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Snoop considered walking over but decided against it. Some lessons take time to sink in. That evening, Snoop reflected on the encounter with his crew. They agreed he had done the right thing, not just for himself but for everyone watching. Across town, Mr. Thompson sat alone at his dining table, replaying Snoop's words in his mind. For the first time, he began to question beliefs he had clung to for decades. The story spread throughout the community, sparking conversations about prejudice, courage, and the power of words. Snoop hadn't just stood up for himself. He'd reminded everyone that dignity and truth can change hearts.